In this video, we are going to explore the basic functionality of the server configuration wizard. So let's get started. Before you can change the configuration of the server configuration wizard, you have to shut down Continuity Engine services. So if you go to the toolbar, we will bring up Continuity Engine and we will stop Continuity Engine and leave the protected applications running. And in a moment, Continuity Engine's R2 service will shut down. And you should see a little pop-up button that tells you and confirms that it's happened. There we go. And now what you can do is bring up the server configuration. All right. Once you do this, in order for you to commit many of the features to Continuity Engine, we have to stop the web services. So I make it a practice to do this, to stop the web services. And it brings up the server configuration wizard. Now, the wizard allows you to configure basic aspects of the Neverfail engine configuration. So this is really the fundamental components. So what are those fundamental components? Well, you have the machine definition, which tells which one is the primary and active. And you also have the channel configuration, so you can build your channel from here or actually reconfigure your channel. You have the public IP addresses that can be managed from here, the management IP addresses. Also, the licenses can actually be managed from here or even viewed. And also, we have the log system. Now, on the machine tab, this one actually allows you to configure or change the identity of the server. So in this case, the physical hardware identity is going to be either a primary, secondary, or a tertiary in a trio configuration, or it'll ask you or tell you which is the active server at the time. In this case, the primary server should be active. Now, and there are rare cases where you may have to switch what the current role is. So these could happen if you've lost the primary server, but you still have one of the passive nodes. So in that case, you could switch the roles so that the secondary becomes primary. And then from there, you could use auto recloning to rebuild your cluster from that node. So the machine tab basically tells the Continuity Engine what the identity and role is. On the channel tab, this allows you to change the channel configuration. Now, as mentioned, the channel configuration can be implemented during the installation process. When you extend the cluster, you give it the IP addresses of both the primary, secondary, and tertiary channel configuration. And then it also, based on what type of topology you're going to deploy, it automatically sets these into the server configuration wizard. On the public IP address, this will be the ones that are filtered. So you could have one, you could have many here, but if you need to change the IP address of that server for some reason, or if you're reconfiguring it to go into a different local area network, you may have to bring Continuity Engine services down, and you can change the public IP addresses here without having to go through a reinstallation process. So if I have to add another IP address, I can just click on Add, and it tells me what adapter this is going to go to, and then I can put the IP address, the subnet mask, and I just click on the Add button, and it will add it to the list of public IP addresses that are filtered. There's the Management tab, which is part of the IP configuration of this. So you can add a management name. This is part of the Cozen passive node management configuration. There'll be a different video for this that actually explains what Cozen does, but just know that you can set up a management IP address and assign it to whatever adapter that you want. And within this, The basic configuration allows you to set a management IP. But if you're going to use this management IP for some type of operational process, maybe for offloading backups, or maybe for patch management technology to be able to do push of those patches down to the server, you would want to create a different identity. So the management name would be unique for every node in the cluster. And then you would be able to set up whether you wanted to have a NetBIOS name or a DNS name. But again, there'll be a different video that will go through all this. But you would want to have at least an IP address, and that allows you to do things like RDP into the passive node without it being visible on the network. And then you actually have the option to be able to see the licenses here. Now, in the engine management service, you can see the licenses and you can copy them out and give them to support if you need to. But this is just another area in which you can get access to the licenses on the server. You can add them manually if you need to. There are times when you could actually add a new license manually, but for the most part, the engine management service, it really handles the distribution of the licenses to all the nodes in the cluster. So very rarely do you need to do this. This might be something that the support team might work with you on, but otherwise, very rarely do you actually have to use this to deploy your licenses. And finally, you can determine how big your log system is going to be. So you can configure that here. You can tell it what's the maximum disk space is going to be, and you can actually create the directories of where they're going to go. So all of this kind of comes together to give you the basic configuration of Continuity Engine using the server configuration wizard. And again, one thing to keep in mind is a lot of the stuff is also configured during the installation process, during your installation wizard. So that process will automatically set these variables. So most of the time, you won't need to use this unless there's a major change in the way your cluster is going to be function, whether it's being moved to a different data center, or maybe a new host name is being rolled out. Maybe you're moving it to a different IP address subnet, or maybe there's some issues that you're working with support on, where you're maybe rebuilding the cluster from scratch, or having to switch these roles, if you will, in order to to restore basic services within the cluster. So all of this kind of comes together, and this is the application that you would use to do these types of tasks. So this concludes the Continuity Engine server configuration wizard presentation.